Hello Internet! For those of you who've never seen one of my videos before, I'm Amazon Kane, I'm a writer, I'm obsessed with Anaconda, I do rewatch videos, among other things, and my ultimate goal is to run an official reboot of the series. You can even see what that would look like on my channel, as I directed a small team to revamp the theme song. Every once in a while, I come across criticisms of Anaconda online. Sadly, in many places, it is still the internet's punching bag. I found a recent review by Cartoon Universe. They're a channel that talk about theories around popular cartoons like Steven Universe. They made a video talking about Anaconda that I wanted to respond to. I've addressed criticisms many times in the past, and there are valid criticisms of the show. I wanted to respond to this one too because they talk about some good points. As someone who knows the show, and even some of the original crew very well, I wanted to fill in the gaps on what the show does right, and to provide a different point of view, because I also loved it as a kid. I will be poking fun at the video, but it is all done in good fun. I have nothing against Cartoon Universe or anyone who hates Anaconda. If you hate the show, you hate it. I'm not here to change your mind, but I do love the show, and I want to showcase the good qualities that are often overlooked, and make my case as to why the show should be given another chance in the form of a reboot. With that being said, here we go.
Those of you who were at least aware of Digimon back in the early 2000s were also probably aware of the show Angela Anaconda.
I actually was not aware of the connection with the Digimon movie until many years later, fun fact.
You probably didn't watch it, you probably didn't like it.
No and no.
But the horrifying animation of these characters made it impossible not to be remembered.
Which is funny because we're all talking about it right now.
Even if all you saw was the occasional commercial for it.
Perfect timing.
It was like the show was trying to be inspiration for future creepypasta.
This may come as a shock to you, but I actually like the animation style. It's cool as well as unique that photos were used as the basis of the characters and the world, and while nothing is above criticism and people are well within their rights to dislike it, not to mention I do understand why people don't like it. A lot of people take issues with the gray faces compared to everything else in color, giant heads on very stick-like bodies, so proportions being off, plus the fact that they're hyper-realistic faces with everything else very cartoony. It gives the whole thing a very uncanny valley quality combined with very stiff animation as a result of early 3D technology. With that being said, first and foremost, that is all stuff that can be improved upon with today's technology. It's also worth noting that there is inherent value in artwork that isn't owned by Disney, takes big risks, and still to this day, 20 years after it premiered, it's still its own unique thing.
From 1999 to literally just long enough to get syndicated, Angela Anaconda was Fox Kids' attempt to add more kid-friendly content after shows like Power Rangers and Digimon got complaints from parents for being too actiony and unreasonably Japanese. As far as I can tell, the most the average person ever actually saw of this show was a small mini-sode that appeared right before the Digimon movie, in an attempt to get Digimon fans interested in it, despite it having literally nothing in common with it.
At this point in time, I haven't seen any information explaining why Anaconda specifically was chosen to be put in front of the Digimon movie, or why Fox Kids chose to distribute it. If anybody, Cartoon Universe, or other fans find this and have that information from a credible source, please send it to me. I'd love to know. It is a weird choice because the two shows really don't have anything in common. I'd be really, really curious as to find out why the choice was made to have Anaconda specifically in front of the Digimon movie, but it wasn't the cast or crew's call. That was a studio decision. I also want to take a second to acknowledge the sheer amount of time, effort, talent, and dedication the Anaconda creative team put in. It's not easy making any artistic endeavor, let alone a fully animated TV show, so I want to give a lot of respect to the artists who worked so hard behind the scenes.
One thing I was surprised to learn, however, was that the show had consistently high ratings, and was even marathoned a lot as a result, and had a steady following of parents writing in to talk about how surprised they were that their kids loved the show so much, particularly for boys who generally aren't thought of as having any interest in shows with a female main character. For some reason, this weird cartoon resonated with some kids relatively powerfully.
Like me! And I have answered this question a lot, but I do want to talk a little bit about why I personally like the show so much. But the reason I personally liked it so much is because Angela's allowed to get angry. I struggled with bullying a lot, and as does Angela, but she's allowed to get angry, and she fully expresses that through her revenge fantasies. Yes, they're weird and they're violent, but they're weird and they're violent. She never actually harms Nanette in the show, but she is allowed to fully express her frustration with a given situation. She's not always in the right, she's not always called out, but the fact that she is allowed to express her anger, which so many people see as a bad emotion or something that should be suppressed, is quite honestly an amazing thing. It shows anger as a normal thing, as a good thing, as a healthy thing, and quite frankly, somebody who struggles with bullying will get angry, like a normal person. And that's reflected very well here.
Now, I took the time to watch a few episodes of Angela Anaconda, and while the show is pretty bad,
Agree to disagree.
most people only assumed it was bad because of the strange animation style. Seeing it in commercials was horrifying enough, and many kids probably didn't want to sit through an entire half hour of it. But those who did might have been pleasantly surprised by some aspects of it. What a lot of people probably don't know is that the show actually originated as short sketches on the Nickelodeon show Kablam, which featured a variety of pseudo-animation similar to Angela Anaconda. I, for one, was fond of the sketches titled Action League Now, a comedy series that used broken old action figures to tell goofy stories. Angela Anaconda had some pretty positive reception on Kablam, and this made Fox decide to greenlight an entire show.
Yeah, how that actually got started was that the creators of Kablam, they approached Joanna Ferrone and Sue Rose, who were also responsible for Fido Dido, about creating something. Joanna Ferrone pitched them a series called Family Values, which they said was too long form and too adult for what they were looking for. They sent her a CD of their typical content. She was blown away by a show called Sniz and Fondue. Then she went to her office, wrote Angela Anaconda, and they had 2 shorts made. And then in between the Kablam shorts and the official series, they were actually pitching it around. They were bought by a Canadian company known as Decode, which became DHX Media, and more recently became Wildbrain. And it was physically made at Core Digital Pictures, which is a Canadian production company.
On its own, however, in the half-hour format, the animation style just doesn't make a lot of sense, and up close is rather terrifying. The show was premised as being about a young girl named Angela Anaconda, and the adventures she has in her everyday life. Like with any kid's show, the setting is often at her school, the plotlines revolve around school events, with way too many field trips being a part of that.
The best way I can break down the plot of the show is that Angela Anaconda, our protagonist, uses her imagination to deal with difficult people. A typical structure of an episode would be Angela wants something, one of her antagonists gets in her way, she has a revenge fantasy, but then she has a creative solution. Plenty of episodes don't just focus on one of her antagonists. Other episodes will focus on Angela and her friends, where she tries to come up with a creative solution to help them out of their various dilemmas.
The cast is mostly made up of her friends and enemies in the classroom, as well as a few teachers and some parental figures. Unlike most kids shows with a similar premise, which tend to balance out all of these different ideas, Angela Anaconda leans heavily into her distaste for the school bully, Nanette Manoir. Nanette Manoir is your typical rich girl type. She likes all things girly, including having this very weird fascination with all things French, which is seen as fancy or romantic.
Interestingly enough, about Nanette, I wouldn't say that she's somebody who is perpetually very girly and embodies all things pink and feminine. Her main thing really is the obsession with France, and Nanette's characterization in the show, earlier on she's portrayed as very much a teacher's pet and a suck-up, but later on it's more focused on how fake she is. And even her design captures that. She looks like this porcelain doll. Angela, while she is very tomboyish, she's not against femininity the way a typical tomboy character might have been portrayed around this time. It's not so much that she hates all things girly, it's more she hates Nanette and things associated with Nanette. Nanette is also trying to put on an act that she's more cultured, more intelligent, and better than everyone else around her.
The opening theme highlights the show pretty perfectly. It's supposed to be about Angela, and she is about to introduce her friends, but then Nanette Manoir appears on stage. The rest of the song is just Angela hitting on Nanette and trying to get her out of the way. The entire show follows this pattern, with it really just being about how these two bump heads.
This is a legitimate criticism of the show, that Angela's hatred for Nanette overrides the bad things that Nanette actually does, which is true. Even in the theme song, Nanette doesn't actually do anything mean to her, other than being a bit arrogant. She shows her up. But she's not actively antagonizing her, and there are times in the show where she doesn't either, whereas Angela's hatred does feel disproportionate. I can understand people being turned off by it, as it is a legitimate problem in the show.
With other characters there for their stereotypical nerd or Italian jokes, and occasionally getting a focal episode. I only watched a few to get a sense of what was going on, but boy, this humor it's weird.
Oh, we're gonna have some fun with this now. When this show's funny, it's really, really funny.
So when I'm old enough, I'm gonna run away from home and become a waitress at a truck stop.
Good it, sister, good it. My hoodlum sister will tell me. Oh, it's the fuzz.
But do any of us really believe that Gina Lash could be that buff after only a few days of training? She should be tested for steroids.
Yeah, just like you should be tested for hemorrhoids, Nanette.
I don't know why you couldn't just keep your eyes on your own paper.
And I don't know why you can't keep your kisser off Brinks' butt.
Next time I do charity work, I'm getting paid for it.
But there are some things that it does do right, or at least there is one thing that it does right. Female representation is a hot topic these days, but even back in 1999, there were some obvious issues. Girls tended to have two major stereotypes, girly girl or tomboy, and they didn't deviate from that pattern very much. Sure, they may introduce a nerd girl here or there to balance it out, but there wasn't much diversity in the actual personalities of these girls. Tomboy characters tended to be very one-note, just a girl who either hated girls and all things girly, or one who hated boys because she believed she could be better than them at boyish things, and hated being kept at the very edge of those activities for not being a boy herself. Angela Anaconda was described as tomboyish by critics, but it never actually said that in the show itself. While it is definitely an applicable term, I think a more accurate one would be that Angela Anaconda is just normal. Her interests make sense to just about any kid, girly or boyish, and her enjoyment of them doesn't come at the cost of anything feminine. She still wears a dress, she still has longish hair, and she doesn't overindulge in something like sports. At recess, she does what most of the other kids do, just climb on the jungle gym. She acknowledges that she hates princess-type things in the pilot, but doesn't quite equate them with girly things. She even has some girly things like hand mirrors and raspberry lip gloss that all the girls back in the 90s had with them. She acknowledges that boys prefer things like monster trucks, but she doesn't act like boys are better as a result. Her best friend is still a girl, and though she is a stereotype combo of fat and nerdy, she doesn't overindulge in tomboy activities, nor does she have an obsession with all things girly either. To put it simply, while there are stereotypes, not just offensive ones, but also more classical character ones, the show uses them in a way that makes the characters actually kind of interesting. Angela is a tomboy, but she isn't defined by that. She's just a kid that gets excited about cool things. She is annoying in her hatred for Nanette, but when they aren't butting heads, she's actually kind of fun. So despite people not having any idea what this show is today, maybe there's a reason it had good ratings back in its time. Maybe girls and boys alike were both able to enjoy it because it wasn't about something hyper-masculinized like Digimon or Power Rangers, but it wasn't hyper-feminized like Sailor Moon or Powerpuff Girls. Instead, it was more about what kids had in common, hating bullies, enjoying cool things like space and monster trucks, or maybe the real reason it did well was that it was on the air right before kids had to go to school, meaning it was always going to be on TV when they were eating breakfast and getting ready for their days. Who's to say?
I'd also like to elaborate on that. There are a couple other things that I'd like to point out that Angela Anaconda does very, very well. For starters, the emotions are very, very honest. Whether she's feeling angst at inequality and bullying, or passion over the nerdy things she likes, the emotions feel 100% genuine. It never feels like it's forced. Even if the plot lines sometimes feel forced, the emotions almost never do. It also deals with negative emotions, particularly anger, which I talked about earlier in this review. The fact that Angela's allowed to get angry and that that's what the show is built around, the fact that she is allowed to get angry and frustrated and fully express that in its weird, violent, creative glory. Again, like a normal kid, it's portrayed as a normal thing and as a good thing, and anybody dealing with inequality or bullying or abusive teachers would go through this. So the fact that it does do that is such a wonderful thing. The final thing I'd like to talk about is the design work, because the design work often goes very overlooked. Angela Anaconda's design is such a good example of the every girl. I definitely looked exactly like that as a kid, and I know a lot of other girls did too. She's not one of your stereotypical beautiful nerds. She looks like a real kid, who's cute but also kind of awkward. And the same is true for her friends. They're not these beautiful kids. They are cute, but there's also an awkwardness to them. And even Nanette's design, even though there are 1,000,001 blonde girls in animation, Nanette's design is still very, very unique. The fact that everything about that design tells you who that character is really something. And you can easily get a sense of who the characters are just by looking at them. It fits within the tone of the show, it fits within the world, it's got this very unique look to it. It still stands out, and the fact that we are still talking about it all these years later means we do remember it. They're very memorable designs, which is better than something that looks like everything else that's out there. So, I hope you enjoyed looking at this just as much as I do. I love talking about the show. I'd love to hear your response to it. Maybe it did terrify some people, but the fact that we still remember it, the fact that we're still talking about it, the fact that there are good qualities in there, maybe the show should be given a second chance after all. So to finish this video, my answer to your question, this was popular, is yes, this was popular. Maybe it's flawed, but Angela Anaconda has a very good idea. It deals with subjects that are always going to be relevant, what with bullying and being angry is a normal part of being a person. Stuff that's not going away anytime soon. I hope more and more people will be open to the good parts of the show. There is more to these characters, there is so much more that can be done with this story, and it is something that's worth revisiting and giving another chance in the 2020s. That's all I've got to say this week. Really good to talk to you. See you later when you see me.